The kind built on money, influence, and the belief that rules are flexible if you're rich enough to bend them. That was the kind of power he believed in. The billionaire's son. He didn't walk into the courtroom like everyone else. He entered like the courtroom belonged to him. No hesitation, no respect, no awareness that every person in that room had a voice that mattered just as much as his. Expensive watch, perfect suit, calm expression that wasn't confidence, it was entitlement. And behind him, a quiet legal team trying to keep up with his attitude more than the case itself. He didn't sit gently. He claimed his seat, and the first thing he said wasn't a greeting. It wasn't even acknowledgement of the court. It was a statement. "Let's make this quick." That was the opening line. Not a question, not a request, a demand. The courtroom shifted slightly, not loudly, but enough. Because people recognize arrogance instantly when it stops pretending to be polite. I looked at him calmly. Years in this courtroom teach you something important. The loudest people are usually the least in control. I opened the file. In front of me, a standard civil dispute on paper, breach of contract. Property damage, financial disagreement, simple structure, complicated attitude. The plaintiff sat quietly across from him, not rich, not powerful, just waiting. The kind of waiting that comes from someone who knows they don't get to control the pace of justice. The billionaire's son leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly. Not friendly, not warm. The kind of smile people use when they already believe the outcome is decided. He looked at the plaintiff and said, "Honestly, you should be grateful I even showed up." That sentence changed the energy in the room, because it wasn't about the case. It was about superiority. I didn't react immediately. I let silence do what silence does best, expose people. Then I said calmly, "You are in a courtroom, not your boardroom." A pause. He tilted his head slightly, amused, not corrected, not humbled, amused. That told me everything I needed to know about how long this would take. He replied, "Same difference." That was the first real mistake, because in this room, it is never the same difference. The plaintiff shifted slightly but didn't speak, and I noticed something important. They weren't afraid of the case. They were afraid of him. That matters, because intimidation is often louder than truth until someone decides to stop it. I looked directly at him and said, "There is no difference at all." The room went quiet, because that line wasn't just a correction. It was a boundary, and people like him don't like boundaries. He leaned forward now, slightly sharper tone. "Do you know who I am?" That question always appears. Different faces, same belief that identity replaces accountability. I closed the file slowly, looked at him, and said, "I know exactly who you are." A pause. Then I added, "The question is whether you understand where you are," and for the first time, his smile faded just a little, not gone, but interrupted, and that interruption was the beginning of the case. The moment I said, "The question is whether you understand where you are," something subtle changed in his expression. Not fear, not humility, but irritation. Because people like him don't respond to correction with reflection. They respond with resistance. He leaned back again, as if the sentence had physically pushed him away from the conversation. Then he gave a short laugh, not genuine, not amused. "Dismissive, relax," he said. "I'm not here to play games." That line would have carried weight in another room, in another setting, with different rules, but in a courtroom. Everything is a game of rules, and he was already losing without realizing it. I flipped a page in the file, slowly, deliberately, not because I needed time, but because people like him mistake speed for control. He continued, now more confident again, feeding off his own arrogance. "This case is simple. My lawyers already told me how this ends." That was the second mistake. Assuming the ending before the facts are complete. The plaintiff's hands tightened slightly on the edge of the table, still silent, still holding everything in. That kind of silence is not weakness, it is endurance. And endurance always has a breaking point, but also a turning point. I looked at him directly. "Your lawyers do not decide outcomes in this courtroom." A pause. Then I added, "Evidence does." That sentence landed heavier than expected, not because it was loud, but because it removed his imaginary control structure for the first time. He didn't respond immediately, just a fraction of hesitation. But I noticed it, because hesitation is where confidence begins to crack. Then he recovered quickly, too quickly. That always means the crack is real. He leaned forward again. Look, I don't know what story they told you, but I own companies. I understand how decisions work. There it was. The word own. People like him use it casually. Like control over systems extends to control over people. I closed the file halfway, looked at him, and said calmly, "You do not own this courtroom." A pause. The room shifted slightly. Even the plaintiff looked up, because that sentence is not just a statement. It is a reminder. He smiled again, but smaller now. Less confident, more defensive. "Everything has a price," he said. "It's just about finding it." That was no longer arrogance. That was assumption of influence, the belief that consequences can be negotiated like contracts. I leaned forward slightly. "Not everything is for sale here." Silence followed, not the comfortable kind, the kind where people begin to realize the direction of the room is no longer in their control. He tapped his fingers once on the table, a nervous habit trying to disguise frustration. Then he said something sharper. "Do you even know what kind of people I deal with?" That question was not for information. It was pressure, a reminder, a warning disguised as relevance. "But relevance means nothing without authority in this room," I replied. "Yes." A pause. Then, "People who believe influence replaces responsibility." That line removed the comfort from his posture. The plaintiff shifted slightly again, this time not just listening but watching carefully, because now the balance was changing. The billionaire's son exhaled sharply through his nose. The smile was gone now, completely, and in its place was something else beginning to form, frustration, because for the first time, he was not steering the conversation, he was reacting to it. And people like him do not handle that well. I turned another page in the file and said, "Let's proceed with the facts." And that's when the real pressure began to build, quietly but unmistakably. When entitlement stops working, people don't immediately change. They escalate. That's exactly what happened next. The billionaire's son adjusted his posture again, trying to regain the version of control he was slowly losing in real time. He leaned forward, voice sharper now. "All right, let's stop this. What exactly is the issue here?" It sounded like a demand for efficiency. But underneath it was impatience, because patience is usually the first casualty when control slips. I opened the file fully now, no delay, no hesitation, just structure. "The issue," I said calmly, "is a breach of agreement and resulting damages." A pause, then I added, "and your refusal to acknowledge responsibility in the matter." That second line shifted the tone slightly. "Because responsibility is where confident narratives start to fracture." He scoffed, not loudly, but enough. "Responsibility," he repeated. "You're making this sound deeper than it is." That sentence is important because it reveals mindset. To him, consequences are always exaggerated when they affect him personally. The plaintiff finally moved slightly in their seat, not speaking yet, still waiting. Still careful. I looked at him. The depth is not created by explanation. A pause. It is created by facts, that word again. Facts. He leaned back, shaking his head slightly. "Look, I've handled bigger disputes than this without wasting time in court." That was no longer confidence. That was comparison, a way to diminish the present, by referencing imagined authority elsewhere. But every courtroom exists independently, and comparison changes nothing. I said, "This courtroom does not operate on your past experiences." Silence followed, longer this time, because now he was no longer speaking from strength. He was speaking from expectation, and expectation is fragile when reality doesn't comply. The plaintiff finally spoke for the first time quietly. "I just want what was agreed." No anger, no accusation, just clarity, and clarity is powerful because it doesn't compete. It simply exists. The billionaire's son glanced at them briefly, then back at me, as if annoyed by their presence in their own case. "This is exactly what I mean," he said. "Emotional involvement is clouding this." That statement revealed something deeper. He believed emotion invalidated legitimacy. I replied immediately, "Human impact does not cancel legal validity." A pause. He exhaled, clearly losing patience now. "Fine," he said. "Let's speed this up. I'll settle it." That line changed the temperature again, because now he was attempting to end the process not through resolution, but through control. I looked at him. Settlement is not a dismissal of accountability. He smirked slightly again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Everything is negotiable. That belief is where most arrogance eventually collapses. I closed the file slightly and said, "Not here." The room tightened again. Even the plaintiff looked more attentive now, because they could feel it to the shift, the transition from arrogance to resistance, from resistance to instability. The billionaire's son tapped the table once. Harder this time. "You're treating me like I'm the problem here." I answered simply, "Your conduct is part of the record." A pause. Then, "Records do not interpret intention." That sentence landed differently, because now intention could no longer protect him. He leaned forward again, voice lower but more intense. "Do you know what happens when people push me too far?" That was not a legal statement. That was instinct trying to reassert dominance. I met his gaze, calm, unmoved. "This is not a place where people get pushed." A pause. "This is a place where people are heard." Silence, complete, and for the first time. He didn't respond immediately, because the structure he relied on, influence, intimidation, expectation, was no longer functioning the way he expected. And when that happens, entitlement doesn't disappear. It starts to crack. Silence in a courtroom is never empty. It is loaded. And right then, the silence was carrying something the billionaire's son was no longer in control of. For the first time since he entered, he wasn't shaping the room. The room was shaping him. He noticed it. I could see it in the small shifts, his posture tightening, his jaw setting, the subtle way his eyes stopped scanning with confidence and started locking in with concern. That shift is important, because arrogance always believes it is permanent. Until it isn't. I turned another page in the file, then spoke clearly. "Let's return to the core issue. No emotion, no escalation, just structure." He exhaled, trying to reset. "Fine, core issue. I already told you this is a misunderstanding," but the word misunderstanding now sounded weaker than before, because repetition without clarity becomes avoidance. The plaintiff finally spoke again, more steady this time. There was no misunderstanding. The room shifted slightly. Not loudly, but enough. Because truth spoken calmly often lands harder than argument spoken loudly. The billionaire's son immediately responded, sharper, "You don't get to decide that." And that was the moment it became obvious he was no longer arguing the case. He was trying to reclaim control over perception. I looked at him directly. "Neither do you." A pause that landed hard. Because it removed both sides from emotional authority. Only facts remained. He leaned forward again, but the confidence was thinner now. "You're acting like I did something criminal." Interesting phrasing. Not incorrect, not disputed, but criminal. That word appeared because he felt cornered. I replied calmly, "No one has used that word." A pause. "You introduced it. That distinction matters in court." Because panic often reveals itself through exaggeration. The plaintiff adjusted their posture slightly, still composed, but now more present in the conversation. The billionaire's son noticed that shift, and it irritated him more than anything else, because he was losing the invisible advantage he assumed he had, dominance of attention. He turned slightly toward them. "What do you actually want?" Not curiosity, not negotiation, dismissal disguised as efficiency. The plaintiff answered simply, "What was agreed? Nothing extra, nothing emotional, just the baseline expectation." And that simplicity made his position weaker, because entitlement struggles most against clarity. I closed the file halfway again and said, "The agreement is clear." A pause. "The execution is not." The billionaire's son leaned back again, but now it wasn't relaxed. It was forced, like someone trying to recreate confidence physically after losing it mentally. He spoke slower now, carefully. "Look, I can fix this quickly. Just tell me what number makes this go away." There it was, the instinctive return, reduction of conflict in two. Money, because for him everything had always been adjustable. Everything negotiable, everything solvable through value, but not everything is priced. I looked at him. "This is not a pricing discussion." A pause. "This is a conduct discussion." That line changed the tone again, because conduct cannot be bought out of consequence. He frowned now, real frustration showing through. "So what, you're just going to lecture me?" That sentence revealed exhaustion, not physical. Mental. Because when control fails, people often mistake explanation for attack. I answered. No, a pause. "I am documenting what is already present." And that is when the shift became undeniable. He looked at the plaintiff again, then back at me, and for the first time, There was no arrogance in his expression, only calculation, because now he was no longer trying to win the case. He was trying to understand how he started losing it, and in that moment, the structure he relied on, money, confidence, influence, finally stopped holding its shape. There's a moment in every courtroom when argument stops mattering, not because people run out of things to say, but because everything important has already been said. That moment had arrived. The billionaire's son sat differently now, still upright but no longer comfortable, no longer performing confidence, no longer steering the room, just waiting. And waiting is something people like him are not used to doing without control. I closed the file slowly, not dramatically, but deliberately, because closure in court is never emotional, it is procedural, and procedure is what separates opinion from outcome. I looked at both parties, then spoke clearly. The court has reviewed the agreement. Testimony and conduct presented. A pause. The room tightened. Because everyone knows what follows that sentence, I continued. The terms of the agreement are valid and enforceable. Another pause. The billionaire's son shifted slightly, not interrupting, not speaking, just absorbing. I turned a page one last time, then said, however. That word always changes everything, because however is where reality enters judgment. The manner in which this matter was handled reflects a clear disregard for proper conduct and responsibility. Silence deepened. Now it was no longer about who argued better. It was about who acted appropriately, and conduct always outlives confidence. The plaintiff sat still, eyes forward now, not emotional, not reactive, just present. I continued. This court does not evaluate individuals based on status or financial position. A pause. It evaluates actions. That line settled heavily, because it removed the last illusion of advantage. The billionaire's son exhaled slowly through his nose, a controlled reaction but no longer confident. I looked directly at him. Do you have anything further to add before judgment is entered? A pause. Longer this time, because now speaking meant risk and silence meant acceptance. He finally spoke, quieter than before. No, that single word carried something different now. Not arrogance, not defiance, just resignation. And that matters more than anger, because anger fights, resignation accepts. I nodded once, then delivered the ruling. Judgment is entered in favor of the plaintiff. A pause. No reaction at first, because the room needed a moment to process finality. Then I added, the agreement is upheld. Any failure in execution must be corrected in accordance with this ruling. The plaintiff lowered their heads slightly, not in defeat, in relief. The billionaire's son didn't move immediately, just stared forward, processing. Something he was not used to, processing loss without negotiation. I continued. Let this be understood clearly. A pause. Everyone focused, even those pretending not to care. This court does not respond to influence. My eyes met his. It responds to accountability. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was final, the kind of silence that replaces argument because argument is no longer necessary. I signed the order. The sound of the pen was small, but in that room it felt absolute, final. He looked down briefly, then away. No protest, no speech, no attempt to reclaim control, because now there was nothing left to control. I stood and concluded. Court is adjourned. That was it. No spectacle, no drama, just consequence becoming record. As I left the bench, I didn't look back, because I didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered. Arrogance doesn't always lose loudly. Sometimes it loses quietly. In the exact moment it realizes the room no longer listens to it, and that is the part people remember most. Not the confidence, not the entrance, but the silence that follows when entitlement finally runs out of space.